Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm happy and glad, we are happy and glad that you are here with us. You know, there is a lot of attention towards our meeting today, a lot of security around us. The topic is hot. Clearly the topic is hot. The squares are full of people for our conference, and there is a lot of security, as I said, for this Turkey in 2023, time for which change. Let me start thanking the panelists. You will meet them very soon. Let me start thanking IFRI and the German Marshall Fund, which are co-promoting this event with us today. And let me, last but not the least, thank Ambassador Meyer-Landrut, who is with us. Ambassador, nice to have you with us today. Can you hear me?
Yes, my pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much.
Fine. Ambassador Nikolaus Meyer-Landrut is the head of the European delegation to Turkey, and we're glad you found the time to stay with us so close after the election, the most important election of 2023, according to The Economist, and which attracted a lot of attention in Europe, of course, given the important relationship between Turkey and Europe. And you kindly agreed to have 10 minutes with us, and I will try to make the best possible use of my time with you. And I will start with, of course, relationship between Turkey and Europe. Erdoğan has won the most important election of 2023, and he will be leading Turkey for 5 more years. Altogether, it makes 25. And let's start from the European angle. And let's start from the frozen accession process. Erdoğan, phase 1, gave a great push to the accession. Erdoğan phase 2 contributed, it was not only him, to the freezing of the process. What about Erdoğan phase 3? What would you expect? The formal step to suspend the accession process, or any sort of relaunch? And if so, starting from which area of possible cooperation?
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, it will be interesting to see also how the president and the new government position themselves now after the election. I would say we hear 2 different stories out of the country regarding Europe or the West. One is some kind of not call it anti-Western sentiments, but criticism and responsibility of the West for this and that. And on the other hand, a repeated recognition of the importance to cooperate and the many fields of necessary cooperation and so on. Now, as to the relations, I don't think we are close to a relaunch of accession negotiations. I think where we are at a stage where we might reinvigorate our cooperation on many areas of common interest, but also this will require some clear signs from the Turkish government which go beyond words, that they really are now committed to this kind of cooperation, which then over time can produce results, build new trust and confidence, and perhaps lead to further developments. But my take at this stage would be the development of EU-Turkey relations after these elections will have to be developed on a step-by-step basis rather than as a big jumpstart.
Thank you. And let's now have a few words on a very relevant issue, both for Turkey and for Europe, irregular migrants and refugees. We have debated at ISPI several times in several conferences the 2016 agreement to prevent arrival of irregular migrants, underlining and addressing the good things and the less good things in that agreement. Do you see any prospect for a renegotiation of the agreement?
at least from the European side, we consider this statement, which has been agreed in March 2016, as a basis for our cooperation, which does not need to be renegotiated, but implemented in its different dimensions. Turkey has done a lot on its side to prevent irregular departures. There are still areas where this can improve. The European Union has done a lot in terms of supporting Turkey with the refugee burden in the country, and this is an effort which is to continue. We have some parts of the statement where either side would say the other one could do more for its implementation, but our approach at this stage is not to renegotiate a statement, but to take the individual elements of the statement and see how we can go ahead with an improved implementation, how to make it more effective.
And can you be more specific on the implementation you would expect further steps in the near future?
We have, for example, said that one of the elements is the one-to-one taking back refugees from the islands if they don't obtain asylum in Greece. This has been halted by the Turkish administration now almost more than 2 years ago. So we would hope that this kind of cooperation can be resumed. We see that there are some streams of irregular migration, even if it is at much lower level than in 2015, 2016, leaving the country, some actually to Italy, some through student visa to the northern part of Cyprus and then over the Green Line to the Republic of Cyprus. So we see areas where more cooperation would be beneficial for both sides. And on the other hand, we see that the earthquake in Turkey, the terrible earthquake on the 6th of February, has hit provinces with a high level of refugee population. About half of the Syrian refugees registered in the country live in these 11 provinces. And we will have to see how we can improve our cooperation with Turkey to bring earthquake response and assistance to refugees together, so that these people find their future, find their livelihoods, find decent living conditions in this area again.
Thanks. Let's now move briefly to the conflict in Ukraine. Turkey's equidistant position, for someone Turkey's ambiguous position, has allowed one of the very few effective mediating role in the conflict so far. How has the war and Turkey's role in the war impacted on the relationship between Turkey and Europe?
We have had in the past month or year a conversation with Turkey on, for example, the issue of how Turkey can help prevent circumvention of European sanctions towards Russia, where, let me also be clear, these circumventions always start with actors in the European Union. It's not Turkish entities which are not allowed to export, but because Turkey is not part of these sanctions. But we have worked with Turkey on this because we think that we should avoid too many loopholes around these sanctions. But I would agree with all those who say that after this election, we probably should have a wider, a more political dialogue with Turkey on Russia, on the changing European security architecture. What does this mean for Turkey, for Europe? Where is the perspective for Russia? Russia will remain a threat for EU member states, for neighboring countries. So the European security architecture has been completely thrown up in the air with this terrible Russian war of aggression on Ukraine. And I think after this election, we should try to re-engage with Turkey on Russia in a wider way, and not only as important as sanction circumvention is, and we need to continue this conversation, but also on a wider perspective. Where do we see Russia in the future? What does this mean for the European security architecture? How do we need to work together? And here, the first and the most important step, which I think we are expecting from Turkey, is the ratification of the Swedish NATO accession. This is, of course, not an EU issue as such, but Sweden is an EU member state. Many other EU member states are NATO members. And I think there's a big expectation that this issue needs to be settled now and settled quickly.
Thank you, Ambassador. You actually anticipated my next question, which was exactly on the veto and what Europe could do on that, and you answered. Let me now move to my last question. I'm afraid time is running very fast. The MENA region, a region in which Turkey plays a relevant role, is witnessing a phase of normalization. And Turkey is certainly a player also in this phase of normalization. How is this impacting on Ankara's relationship with the European Union? Or in other words, how can Europe benefit from this détente?
Well, on Syria, I think the objective between the European Union and Turkey are the same. We are looking and hoping and working in our diplomatic efforts for a political solution which would include, of course, also the opposition forces. We don't see much progress on this, but we also know that without a political solution, the European Union will not invest in reconstruction in Syria. And without reconstruction and without a political solution, it is very hard to imagine that refugees from either Turkey or elsewhere would go in any significant number back to Syria. So the question is how to get these processes going. The process between Turkey and Syria, I would say, is still at a very early stage. And the different expectations are not matching at all. Syria clearly wants Turkey to withdraw its troops, and Turkey wants to ensure the security of its borders. And so this is still a long way to go.
Ambassador, it was a pleasure, a real pleasure. Thanks for being so blunt and honest with us, and good luck for your important role in Turkey. Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador. And we now move into session one, which will be chaired by Francesco Rocchetti, Director of Rome Med.
Good afternoon, everybody. After a section on foreign policy, we go back to internal politics and what are the consequences of this vote. And today, together with me on stage, we have 4 panelists and 1 hour to dig into this topic. I'll begin from Seren Korkmaz, Executive Director, Istanbul, and Resident Scholar at the Middle Eastern Institute. Dorothea Schmidt, Senior Research Fellow at IFRI and Head of the IFRI Turkey Program. Güven Sak, Managing Director, Economic Policy Research Institute, TEPAV. And Sinem Adar, Associate Researcher at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Good afternoon, everybody. I think we can start and we can begin from the results of these elections. These elections, in a way, were very tight, let's say 52 to 48. They might not seem so tight, but given the latest results of Turkish elections were sort of tight. So I'll begin from you, Seren, asking 48 to 52 means usually a highly polarized country, especially given the very high turnout that went to the polls. So how do you see this country exiting from these elections? What's the country that now he's under Erdogan is more divided than ever?
Well, thank you. Actually, when we look at the electoral results, it was totally surprising for Turkish community, both for the opposition and both for the government side, especially the results in the first round, because many polls was explained that the opposition will more close to win this election. It was most difficult election for President Erdoğan, and his tactics, as well as anti-populist playbook of the opposition, actually should be added to the political issues, political motivations of the opposition parties around the world. First of all, it was difficult elections for Erdoğan because there were economic crises, and earthquake has affected the country in a very devastating way, and there were systemic crises which stems from the hollowing out of the institutions and under presidential system, and also there is a unified opposition. Because of all these reasons, it was the election that the opposition actually is more close to win these elections. So they have created Nation Alliance, and by taking the support of the pro-Kurdish party and leftist parties, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu has gained a momentum towards the election. So yes, there is a unified opposition. On the one hand, there are systemic crises, there are economic crises, and locked blocks in the country. Parties. So opposition couldn't achieve to unlock these blocks, despite they have seculars, despite they have conservatives, secular nationalists, and even Kurds. They couldn't achieve it. Because when we look at the electoral dynamics, actually, on the one hand, there is security, geopolitics, and strong state with its air drones, war technology, and new car brand Tog produced in Turkey. So Erdoğan has concrete issues in the elections. When we look at the opposition, they have democracy, justice, and economy on their agenda. So when we do our polls in Turkey, we try to understand the perception behind the polls in Istanbul Institute. We ask basic questions of what are the main problems of Turkey, and the polarized groups, the supporters of the opposition alliance, says that it's economy, it's security, and education, and migration. And the same is also come from the other side. So the problems are same, but they see the responsible actors behind problems different. For the government side, for the government supporters, they are foreign agents, they are internal enemies, but for the others, it's the government. So we can say that the opposition coalition, the opposition alliance couldn't convince the other side. So Erdoğan's main strategy was to actually again manage this polarization. First, he managed the loyalty, and he gave the basic message given by the populist leaders: if I lose, you will lose. So you will be punished under the opposition government. And secondly, he managed perception, and he said that, okay, the opposition has connections with the terrorists, so all in the media, they have promoted this idea, and they have also promoted a lot of disinformation. On the other hand, Erdoğan tried to give the sense that, especially in the earthquake zones, I can the only actor who can rebuild this country again. And he has convinced by state power and by using media power. So it's about the conviction issue. Yes, we can say that the government has so many apparatuses to convince people, but it seems to block these frozen blocks, the opposition should have more micro management of these issues. So they need to convince other sides of the society. That's why when we look at these all scenarios, we can say that Erdogan's strategies work well. And the last thing that he did, he has created his own opposition within the People's Alliance, his own alliance. And many people who are dissatisfied with the government, they have voted for those parties. So Erdogan's parties has lost its voice, but those voices couldn't pass to the opposition side. So again, with these tactics, with creating his own blocks, he managed to keep this polarization. That's why after that it would be, again, the main questions of Turkish politics. Thanks.
Well, thank you. I'll turn to Sinem with a question on, it might sound a little bit too European as a question, but we know that Turkey has a very big diaspora, especially in Europe, in Germany and France. And how did the diaspora vote? I mean, it was as polarized as the country, or it was, as in the past, more pro-Erdogan in general?
Thank you also for the invitation and for coming. Diaspora vote actually has been a very contested and a controversial topic, not only in Europe, but also I think especially in this election in Turkey as well, that mainly because of the fact that Mr. Erdogan's vote share abroad is usually higher than his vote share within Turkey. Just to give a very quick example, in the current election, for instance, Mr. Erdogan got 52% of the vote within Turkey, whereby abroad he got 59% of the vote. And that means that Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu's or the opposition's candidate's vote was lower than what it was in the country. I think in order to kind of understand what this vote means, one needs to look at what diaspora meant for Mr. Erdogan and the AKP. Just to start with, Turkish diaspora, about 6 million people with Turkish citizenship live outside of Turkey, and around 5 million of that live within Europe. And most part of that 5 million live in continental Europe, mainly in 5 countries: Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Austria, and France. And that, I'll come to that in a bit, but that basically mainly goes back, or the origins of the Turkish diaspora in these 5 countries go back to the 60s, to the labor agreements that the respective countries signed with Turkey at the time, after the Second World War. Now, Turkish citizens living abroad were able to vote in Turkish elections since 1987, but until 2014, they were able to do that only at the land crossings, be it at the airports or as you basically, if you are going to Turkey by car, at the customs, at the crossing. There was the AKP changed law in 2012, which allowed Turkish citizens living abroad to vote in the countries they reside in. And that was a long-standing demand from within the communities throughout the 1990s and the 2000s. So in a way, the AKP responded, saw this demand, existing demand among the diaspora, and responded to it, as it responded to a couple of other demands that were actually coming from the Turkish diaspora throughout the 1990s, such as to have a more centralized and coordinated civil society, i.e. coordinated space for migrant associations, or for instance to lobby or to engage in lobby activities towards European governments in order to foster and strengthen the rights of Turkish citizens living abroad. And clearly, AKP and Mr. Erdogan heard these demands and responded to them by, on the one hand, expanding the migrant associations in different European countries that are closely related to the AKP. but also pushing for the rights of Turkish citizens living abroad. Just to give a quick example, for instance, Turkish citizens, even if they are born in Germany, cannot vote in local elections unless they have German passport. And this was a long-standing complaint by the community. As the Turkish MPs coming to Germany, for instance, in the 1990s, they were meeting with the representatives of the migrant associations, and this was a running complaint. So towards this direction, Erdoğan was, for instance, putting on the German governments to kind of change this regulation. It didn't change up until this day. But this is basically just to say that I think one of the reasons, there are both demand side factors, but also supply side factors that explain the high popularity of Mr. Erdoğan. So all these, the ones that I mentioned, are mainly demand side factors. On the supply side, I think there are different factors that play the role in Mr. Erdoğan's high popularity among the diaspora, again, in mainly the continental European countries. I'll come in a bit to the question about the polarization. And that has to do with economic reasons, with cultural/psychological reasons, and religious reasons. But it looks like I did some research back in 2017-18 in Germany among AKP supporters and those parts of the diaspora who are, even if they didn't vote for Mr. Erdoğan and AKP, they were sympathetic towards the party and Mr. Erdoğan. And it looks like, I mean, ideology and loyalty to the leader definitely play a role, but there are also material reasons why people are sympathetic towards Mr. Erdoğan and the AKP, and I'm happy to expand on it if you have questions during the discussion. Now, when it comes to the, and perhaps before I move to the second part of the question about polarization, just a couple of statistics which I think are important also to explain how, in a way, AKP kind of expanded its influence within diaspora. Now, the first election that Turkish citizens were able to vote in the countries that they reside in was the 2014 presidential elections. Turnout rate then was 18%. In the 2018 elections, turnout rate increased to around 47%. So that's quite of a jump. And that has to do mainly with the mobilization efforts of the AKP and Mr. Erdoğan. In the current election, 2023, the turnout rate increased to 56%. So again, there is a significant increase from 2018 to 2023. Now, when it comes to the issue of polarization, I think one needs to look at or one needs to think of the diaspora vote both in terms of the differences among different countries, but also in terms of the differences within a particular country. And that the vote or the composition of the vote is heavily defined and shaped by the migration patterns. So in a country like Germany, you have Mr. Erdoğan getting high vote shares and being the leading candidate, whereby in a country like the US, for instance, it is Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu. It's the opposite. And that has to do, and if you look at the migration patterns from Turkey to the US, it's mainly the migration of students, or people who go to the US for highly skilled labor for work-related reasons, whereby in Germany, it's, again, there were different waves of migration, and I'll come to that shortly. It's the origins of it, or the first wave of migration goes to the 1960s, to these labor agreements. So the pattern of migration is the most defining factor that explains the differences in the vote among countries. Now, when it comes to the differences in the vote within a specific country, I mean, in the continental European, those 5 countries that I mentioned, and I should perhaps, before I go to that, mention in Italy, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu actually got almost 75-76% of the vote. Now, I don't know the history of the migration from Turkey to Italy, but I would be happy to hear if you, now, differences within, and I stop in 30 seconds. Differences, when it comes to the differences within a particular country, in the 5 continental European countries I mentioned earlier, Erdoğan basically wins in almost any consulate district. But it's interesting, for instance, in Berlin, he got around 54%, whereby in Essen, which lies in the western part of Germany, close to the border with the Netherlands and Belgium, he won like 78% of the vote. And that also has to do with the migration patterns, because Berlin is a very diverse city, and it has basically migrants coming from Turkey to Germany in different times. In the 60s as guest workers, in the 1980s as political emigres in the 1990s, after in the context of the war between the Turkish army and the PKK, again as political emigres. So you have a very diverse community in Berlin as compared to other parts of Germany, for instance. So all of this long story is to say that yes, it is polarized, but at the same time there are also very significant nuances both between countries but also within a specific country. Thank you.
Thank you. So we should look at migration flows before and migration history to tell the story of the vote outside Turkey. But staying in Europe, I wanted to go to Dorothée and ask a little bit about the perception of this election. What we saw also on Italian media and many European media was a lot of attention on this election, and it's not usual. I mean, we do it for US elections, we do it for European elections, but it was very unusual to see so much interest on these elections in Turkey. So my question is why these elections were so interesting for Europeans, and on Europe's relation with Turkey. How do you see the new appointment, the new foreign minister, a former spy master, as, how do you see it in the context of our relationship with Turkey?
Thank you, first of all, for the invitation, convening such a brilliant crowd here, all friends. I'm the only non-Turk, by the way. So, yes, I know, but you're a neutral referee, you know. So I'm happy to know that in Italy the interest was shared, because in France there was an unbelievable display of resources to follow the Turkish elections. Unbelievable. I mean, all the media sent, you know, special squads to Istanbul, Ankara, etc. We were meeting. We were with my team in Turkey the week before the elections, and we met reporters everywhere. I was with Belgian reporters in my hotel in Ankara. I'd never seen anyone from the RTBF, you know, in Ankara before. I suppose they do sometimes report on Turkey, but so I think it reflects the fact that, first of all, Turkey is important, and we've realized that it has become important. It's not that it is important, but it's gaining in importance. And we know it's a partner of Europe, but we don't know if it's a partner, actually. It's an interlocutor, it's someone we have to work with. And we know it's a difficult relationship. So I think there is this awareness now among the European public that we are linked to Turkey. We're linked because there's the accession process, even if it doesn't work. There's the refugee issue. There are trade issues. Of course, there's an economic link that's very important, and that Güven will probably, you know, of course, dig deep into after I give these few insights. So, and of course, the Russia-Ukraine crisis has just put the focus on Turkey so much, because everybody knows, it's in the news, that the Turks are, some would say, they have their balancing act between the West and the East, between Russia and Ukraine, between us and their other partners. But then most of the time, the way it's categorized is that Turkey is basically a traitor, because it's so ambivalent that in fact it's being pro-Russian more than pro-Ukrainian, and this goes against the interest of the European bloc that is siding with NATO, and we have this transatlantic issue for ourselves, and my worry personally is that the Turks are going to speak directly to Washington over our heads. So I think there is this awareness among the Europeans that Turkey is playing a role that impacts Europe, and that Turkey has leverage on Europe. Turkey has leverage internally and externally. Internally because of the diaspora that Sinem has just been talking about. And in France, this is a very, this is an everyday issue. I mean, I don't know if the way the polling stations were managed in Italy was a topic in the news. But in France, half of the news about the Turkish elections was how they organized the polling in France. And all the incidents.
It was a topic, but it was not the main
so
topic in Italy.
The fights around the polling stations in France was very much a topic. In Lyon, in Strasbourg, in Bordeaux, etc. So in all the regional media, which is a very strong, community in France. Most of the reporting was around, Kurdish, Turkish, pro-Erdogan, anti-Erdogan, Armenian, Kurdish, grey walls, whatever, etc. So that has become a big part of the substance that's being discussed around Turkey in France. And it is linked to the external leverage, because there is this now there is this thing, this obsession that Erdogan is directly driving the diaspora. Not only did he give the possibility of vote to the diaspora, but he's talking to them directly, and he's sort of stirring their nationalist sentiment. So the anti-Armenia, anti-Kurdish, anti-Gülen, whatever, and this is provoking problems in our countries. And then there's the external leverage with Ukraine, of course, but not only, because we know Turkey has been a very important player. For France, what matters is the Middle East, but also Africa. And of course, Turkey is more and more active and super smart, I'd say, way to penetrate African markets, political markets, not only economic markets, is really, puzzling the French very much, because it's challenging them in all their, all the chasse gardée. So there is, in fact, to me, a sense of structural competition with Turkey that we're in denial of it. When you talk to the diplomats from the Quai d'Orsay, most of them would say, but we don't play in the same league. Turkey is not at the same level.
Not anymore.
And my problem is to try and explain that, contrary to what the French media say, Turkey is not isolated, Turkey is a big player, Turkey is becoming more important than us in so many areas, and this is very difficult to explain and to make the French acknowledge. This is really, there is a sort of inertia in the perception of Turkey in my country, which I don't think is shared in other countries, for instance, not in Germany, I'm sure. So we basically realized that the relationship has become more strategic, but this strategic relationship is not being handled strategically. And so we're worried that the Turks are going to, cause problems. Of course, the refugee issue is still very much on the table. But what's going to happen there, and it's very funny, because we had a brain game with the French army recently, where they made all sorts of terrible crisis scenarios with Turkey, but they were all around Greece, all about, incidents of the coast of the Aegean Sea, whatever, and some sort of very, outdated, old-fashioned type of incident with Turkey. And at some point, I was playing Turkey myself, merci, and so I said, okay, so now I'm Tayyip Erdoğan, I want to show that I'm serious about the refugee issue in Turkey and that I want to relocate the Syrian refugees. So I give a call to Putin and I just organize a meeting, a high-level meeting in Russia, convening, the Iranians, the Syrians, and myself, and I invite the European Union. And I say, please come, because we know you have a stake there and we need you. And what do we do? Because we're absolutely still in the, sanctions around Syria, but we know there are disagreements within the EU. And the Turks are very smart and very skilled in playing out on these divergences within the EU. So I think on Syria, we've been told that even if the French and the Germans are still very hard on the sanctions, some other countries will be, listening to Turkey's suggestions that it's now time to normalize, because after all, the Arab League has been normalizing. We all have an interest in reconstructing Syria, etc., etc. So, but there we are still in, patching all these bits of information, and it looks like it's too big for us to make sense of it.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's interesting also because it might be that in Italy we have a sort of a different view on Turkey, since we had to deal with Turkey on migrants so much in the past 10 years. I think we're more aware of the change and the evolution of the country, I think. And this is part of also of the explanation of why we followed so much, in Italy at least, the elections. But I think we now have to turn to economy, because it has been a huge issue within the country and outside the country. And some of the first moves of Erdoğan were specifically on economy and looking, I would say, at the West and at normalizing also the perception. And so, Güven, I would ask you, what's your expectation given the recent new appointments as Minister of Economy and Central Bank? What's your expectations of what Turkey will do in the coming months to overcome a sort of a serious economic situation?
Yeah, I'm trying to control myself not to answer all those things that were discussed here. So
Thank you.
Let me just say a few things at the outset.
Okay.
Because this is the first election, that we chose Erdoğan in the second round.
Yeah.
He couldn't be elected in the first round of the elections. And I think it is related with the dire straits that the Turkish economy is in terms of the economy. And it is not that much, I mean, if you have two candidates,
Yeah.
you polarize.
Right.
At the end of the day, you have to choose one of them. But I think we didn't have only presidential elections, we also have parliamentary elections this time. And in the parliamentary elections, AKP, the party of Erdoğan, lost heavily.
Yeah.
But CHP and the other opposition parties couldn't gain a lot. But there are new splinter groups that became important, I think, because in our previous parliament after the 2018 elections, about 8 political parties entered the election, 5 were represented at the parliament. In this election, 24 were on the ballot, and there are also 10 that were inside other parties, so 34 political parties were in the competition, and now 17 of them are in the parliament. When there were 5 political parties in the parliament, 98% of the votes were represented by those 5 political parties, but only 94% of the total vote is now represented by these 17 political parties. So there are parties still outside the parliament, if you look at. So when you look at Turkey now, because of the economic problems, especially the rapid rise in cost of living, in the last 3 to 4 years, what we see is a kind of an atomization of the political center. And what we are seeing is very much like you are seeing in Italy, in France, and some other countries. We see, as you have Eurosceptics here, so we have some skeptics in Turkey too. If you look at the election results, they were around 2% in 2018. Now they are 11%, all those political parties. So this is a major change if you look at that, and it is mostly related with the economic situation. And what you can expect from Erdoğan now, if he would like to contain all those guys in the same coalition, he has to be more Eurosceptic. There is no other way. And that's why the current economic situation is very much important. He won the elections because in the first quarter of this year, he started distributing funds. There was an increase in the minimum wage, there was an increase in the salaries of the workers, of the government employees, an increase in pensions. A pensions de-reform was also achieved in the same period. And now, this year, for example, our budget deficit is going to be around 10%. That's the official, that's what they are working on in Ankara now. It's around going to be 10%. This is 20-year high. It was like that before AKP. So we are going back to that. And also the current account deficit is going to be 6%. That's, 10-year high if you look at the averages. So Turkey is now about to enter a kind of a balance of payments crisis. So It's not the same, but it's like the Argentinization of the Turkish economy or the Lebanization of the Turkish economy. But of course, every country lives its own balance of payments crisis. So you can't say that, it's going to be like Argentina or like Lebanon. Because in the case of Turkey, as Dorothy has mentioned the other dimensions, but in terms of the economic structure, I think Turkey is the only industrial country in our region, down from Russia to the Gulf, besides Israel. So if you look at the industrial potential of Turkey is very much important. So any kind of rationing of foreign exchange and inability to import inputs into our industry is going to be devastating for the Turkish economy, and it means a rapid rise in unemployment till the municipal elections that we are going to have in 9 months. So I think that's the reason why there is a kind of trying to change the track and trying to go back to rational policies, as Mehmet Şipek has mentioned. But we are not yet sure because, we have learned about this think that Turkey is going to become more rational in terms of its economic policies about 10 days ago, 15 days ago now, but we still don't know. We'll see after Şimşek is going to meet with the bankers, then we'll learn more about the situation, I think. But the objective is there, and I think Erdoğan is convinced to do this move because otherwise he can't win the municipal elections because then we go to the municipal elections doubling up the unemployment rate, because in a country where the industrial potential is important, where factories are important, where production in the factories are important, if because of rationing of the foreign exchange you can't import the inputs, then you can't take the outputs out, then of course you have to lay off the workers for very, very quickly. It's like the rapid rise in the inflation rate, we may have a rapid rise in the unemployment rate. That's why this thing about doing something new in terms of the economic policy is very much real. That's how I see the situation now.
And I mean, if you would have to put in order what Turkey should do to improve its economic situation and beyond monetary policy, I mean, we know that these are credible appointments, but we know also that in order to improve the situation, there's the need to reverse some previous policies. What would you recommend?
We don't have much of a policy framework up until now. I mean, that thing about, lower interest rates to lower inflation is not a policy. It's a belief. And we have already shown that it's not working. And everybody has seen that. And if you look at the election results, again, in Turkey, AKP lost most in poorer areas of Turkey. I mean, if you look at the different cities, they lost most of their votes in the poorer areas. So I think that policy frame, that arrangement, it's not a policy, so that arrangement cannot continue. Okay. So they have to change that. There is going to be a real monetary policy framework. A fiscal policy framework is very much needed, but now, because of this increase in the salaries, etc., now around 91% of the budget is now tight. It's not possible to reorganize those expenditures. They are frozen. They are salaries, interest payments, etc. So it's around 91%. So that leaves out only around 9%. So I think there is the need to do something drastic in terms of fiscal policy too at the same time in order to get through this process. But I think there is room for maneuver. I mean, when compared to the 2001 crisis, the country is in a better shape, no question about that. In 2001, we had a banking crisis. Some of our banks were bankrupt. No such situation today. Again, in 2001, some of the companies went bankrupt. We didn't have any troubled companies at the moment. Both the banks and the companies are in a better shape. And also, if you look at the budget, not the budget part, the budget expenditure part, but if you look at the public debt, it's very low, around 27% of the GDP. So there is room for movement, let's say. It all depends on having a strong stance, a policy stance, a credible policy framework is needed now, and these guys can deliver that. But it's not possible for those two guys to make those changes, so we need to see other names. We need to hear more names about who are going to work together, and not only in these ministries, but in the central bank, in other places too, I think. Because what Turkey needs with this industry, etc., with Europe going toward this, from single market to digital single market, the Europe going towards this green transformation, Green Deal process, our customs union arrangement with the EU that has helped Turkey very much in transforming into an industrial country at the end of the day, is now not working. Because the backbone of trade is digital now, so we need to go in that direction too. And also, the trade itself now there are many restrictions, conditions regarding with this Green Deal, and we need to comply with those. So there is the need for a huge reform effort on the part of Turkey in terms of a strong, also a decarbonization agenda at the same time. And hopefully that can also be done. It's possible for Turkey to have a kind of a customs union modernization arrangement with the EU, and then work through a reform process along these lines, digitalization and decarbonization. But these also are issues that are important and that needs funding. So that's 91% frozen budget is not a good thing for these reform efforts also.
Thank you, Güven. Well, the economy was one of the main points that the opposition used during the electoral campaign, but in the end, Kılıçdaroğlu didn't win. And some people might say that he has been the leader of the CHP since 2010, but he has not won an election yet. Some others might say that's true, but still he managed to get 48% of the vote. So how does the opposition emerge from this election? Is more fragmented, is more united, or, how do you see the opposition?
Well, difficult question. First of all, actually, when we look at Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu's, whether he has success or fail, when we look at all of the composition of the elections, many polls and their discourses, we can say that it's a failure, actually. However, on the other hand, it's quite visible that the opposition is playing in an uneven field in Turkey. Under media blockage, and the government has effectively uses the state resources. But this was the case in Turkey for many years under the AKP government. And the system, especially under the presidential system, the personalization of the politics has become the main dominant issue in Turkish politics. So maybe one of the issues that's the most interesting for many around the world is how the anti-populist playbook of the Turkish opposition will impact the electoral results. So I think there are so many lessons for both Turkish opposition and also for the global political networks for these elections. Yes, they treated the economic as the main agenda of the Turkish elections, but it seems that President Erdoğan has utilized to turn this economic issue in another way for his own sake. First of all, as a populist leader, he has played with the populist playbook. He has benefited from the crisis that his government has generated, as we see in the other cases of the populist leaders. One of the main issues in the election was that the opposition was mainly complaining of the prices of the onion in Turkey, but the government has effectively turned into an idea of, okay, would you like to choose the onion or would you like to choose your homeland? So Erdoğan has utilized this allowing your nation behind the nation is in front of the economy. This is one thing. And second issue is that when we look at the electoral map, we can see that the opposition has won the metropolitan cities, the Kılıçdaroğlu and other opposition parties, because they felt the economic crisis in a very high way. But in rural areas, in small cities, with Erdoğan electoral economy policies, people didn't feel it in a very high way. So that also with the impact of the media, they bought Erdoğan slogans. On the other hand, I think there is a trust and anxiety issue here. So that people probably didn't trust the government. That's the issue. And they felt anxiety. They didn't trust the opposition. They felt anxiety. And about the opposition, related to the actually title of this conference, Time for Which Change, for the opposition, there is a need for change of the actors, there is a need for change of politics, and change of the alliances. The bad thing for the opposition against, they did their best to unify the opposition blocs, because it's very difficult. It's something like a tightrope walking, because it's very difficult to create a policy that you can bring nationalists, conservatives, Kurds together. That's why somehow it also became depoliticized, and with their vision alliances, they couldn't turn to all the democratic agenda to a pragmatic solutions that the people understand. I think, especially before the first round, they have a very good campaign with the inclusive campaign, but also it couldn't reach all of the country. So I can say that the job of the opposition in Turkey very difficult, but the main risk for them is the local elections. Because now Turkish opposition has to change all these dynamics, and they have their internal questions after this failure, so that they have a risk to lose the local elections because it's too close. That's why it might create a kind of loss of hope among the Turkish opposition. So that's why I think the change in the dynamics would be important. So maybe last couple of words. First of all, when we look at the main composition, if you closely follow Turkish politics, the main opposition party, the CHP, will have their own internal debates after Kılıçdaroğlu's failure. So we will probably see the debates about whether Kılıçdaroğlu will continue his leadership. It seems that he will continue. But also there is a demand for popular mayor İmamoğlu's leadership. And secondly, among the HDP, whether they will continue with support of the opposition in local elections in the next elections, but probably they will have the third way, because they are discussing the third way. And the third issue is that newly emerging parties, DEVA and Gelecek parties, they are separated from the AKP, led by previous minister Babacan and Davutoğlu. Whether they will create alliance, rapprochement with the AKP, or most probably whether they will put strict lines with the CHP, so that all these dynamics will make a unified opposition issue very difficult in the upcoming years. But again, in Turkish politics, everything changes very fast, so that they will probably feel this change issue. And also one last thing about the future of Turkey. Before the elections, there were so many interests about the youth's political choice in Turkey. And opposition had a lot to think, to get this voice at the beginning, but towards the elections, probably they think that, okay, they want the youth support. However, when we look at the electoral results, we can see that still there is an important support for Mr. Erdoğan, but also the youth, they used vote for the third candidate, Sinan Oğan, in the first round, because they were protesting the elections rather than choosing Erdoğan or Kılıçdaroğlu, which in somehow signals the symbols of the status quo in Turkey, so that I think their politicization also will be an important factor for the future of Turkey, and whether the opposition will convince them or not, or which kind of opposition will convince them, so that these are the questions in front of the opposition and in front of Turkey.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes left in this panel, and I have 2 questions left. I'll turn to Dorothée for a question. I mean, Turkey, as we know it today, cannot be considered a liberal democracy. We have seen violations of human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the deterioration of the rule of law. Yet, this is precisely what makes Turkish elections so remarkable. In a political system where checks and balances have been destroyed, yet an election with 2 rounds actually of elections were held. We cannot say they were completely fair, but they were held. And one can hardly imagine 2 rounds of elections in China, in Russia, and in many countries surrounding Turkey. The Turkish political system isn't completely democratic, but Turkish society demonstrated a democratic resilience. So my question is specifically on democratic resilience. Do you see some prospects for revamping the democratic process in Turkey?
I don't know if I should answer this question. I don't know if it's if the question should be addressed to me, but let me make a mix of remark and answer. First thing, I quite agree with what Güven said about polarization. I remember, when I studied political science, like many years ago, the bipartisan system of the UK was an ideal in democracy. And I remember in my childhood in France, the society was totally, was super divided. I mean, there was the left, there was the right. So now we've entered this sort of gray zone about democracy. And that's all my concern is how we define democracy. And I think there's a mirror effect with Turkey, because Turkey is quite democratic in many ways. And this is why there was such attention on this election, in fact. Otherwise, if everybody knew the results in advance, why send all these reporters to Turkey, of course? So, and then what happens? That's my usual joke, like, when you talk to the French, everybody thinks Erdoğan is going to lose the election, he always wins. Everybody thinks they're the loser on the international scene, and they do a lot. Everybody thinks they're going through a terrible economic crisis, but it never happens. So, I mean, Erdoğan has won. So what does it mean for us? It means that the mirror the Turks gave us for the last, decade, they were telling me, the far right is rising in Europe. This is happening. Okay, so what does it mean for us? We have our own, internal super strong debates about that. So, of course, Turkey is very different from Russia. The problem is probably more with what Sinem has said about populism and the rise, of course, of this style of this management of democracy in a very degraded way. So we have the feeling that this is slowly downgrading democracy, because it is democratic in many aspects. But at the same time, this is not necessarily the democracy we want. And we have to fight on our own side, in our own countries, to protect this ideal of democracy that we had. And we see that democracy in Turkey is more resilient, maybe, in some aspects. So this is really This is, I think, the whole debate that we're having. Who are we to give norms?
Oh, for sure. Thank you. Well, the last question is for you. And it's a question that looks to the future. And now we have 5 years of Erdoğan in power. And we have 5 years in which, of course, he will, as you were saying before during lunch, but we will try to consolidate what he has built in the last 20 years. And how do you see this country's future, also given Erdoğan is not eternal?
Thank you. Given that I was trained as an historical sociologist, I'm actually not good at reading the future, but I'll give it a try. And I guess that also makes me a bad think tanker, but let it be. I'll start with the famous Gramsci sentence, you know, the old is dying, but the new cannot be born. I think that's what was happening in Turkey in the last, to put the least, since 2016, if not even earlier than that. And kind of, on the one hand, a lot of contradictions. On the other hand, the state of flux, but also the crisis situation was, I think, a consequence of that the old was dying, but the new cannot be born. So in the coming 5 years, I think one strategic motivation of Mr. Erdoğan would be to try to kind of make that new born. And whether he would be able to do that or not, I don't know. That's an open question. But I say that against the backdrop of the discussions that took place after the formation of the new cabinet, because the kind of the emerging narrative is that the new cabinet actually signals that Mr. Erdoğan in his new term is willing to moderate. And I think there is a truth in that. But at the same time, one can actually find evidence for kind of like arguments to make in both directions. Because on the one hand, you see, for instance, a new lawsuit against Istanbul's mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu, that was filed, I think, 2 days ago. You see, for instance, one of the newly elected MPs from the Turkish Workers' Party, Can Ataylı, who is imprisoned, is not released from the prison, even though Article 83 or 82 of the Turkish Constitution gives immunity to the MPs, so he should be released from the prison, as the new parliament is now working. You see the crowds that gathered in front of the presidential palace on the night of the election, the second round, as Erdoğan is giving his victory speech, the crowds chanting, asking for death penalty for the Kurdish politician Selahattin Demirtas. You see 5 days ago the police violently breaking up an LGBTQ march in one of the most known universities in Ankara. Anyway, the name doesn't matter. So all of these are kind of like evidences, if one is looking for evidences that Mr. Erdoğan in his new term will not moderate and the Turkey's authoritarian path will continue. All these are, I think, evidences that speak for it. Now, if you turn your face to the cabinet, then I think you can also find maybe not evidence, because we still don't know the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, but you see, just basically looking at the names that are selected, that some signals that there is a willingness to moderate, be it the new Minister of Treasury and Finance, Mehmet Şimşek, who, as Güven Hoca mentioned, who emphasized the need to return back to the rational policies, or be the Minister of Foreign Affairs, for instance, Hakan Fidan. And the narrative that has been emerging since the formation of the new cabinet is that the new cabinet that is composed of technocrats is actually that Erdoğan is willing to moderate. And Erdoğan actually got rid of, if you will, the quote-unquote the hawkish elements that existed in his former cabinet, i.e. the former Minister of Interior, Süleyman Soylu, or the Minister of Defense, Hulusi Akar. Now, I think one needs to kind of think of and I'm going to tie this up to the question of what's coming up in the next 5 years and perhaps also the succession. One needs to kind of think of this both at the level of tactics, but also at the level of strategy. At the level of tactics, because of the situation of the economy, Mr. Erdoğan is in dire need to basically find money, to put it very brutally. Therefore, he needs to give that signal to the outside world that he's willing to moderate. But he is also faced by structural constraints, be it the personalization of power and the institutionalization of the state system. For instance, the central bank is not independent, although maybe the new head of the central bank will kind of do wonders to give central bank independency. We will see. That's why the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. But he also needs to, going back to the structural constraints, he also needs to speak to a lot of competing interests, that vested interests, that some of which he created himself in the last 2 decades. And it's not going to be easy, and that would probably lead to a lot of zigzagging, because you need to satisfy a lot of different constituencies, a lot of different interests. Now, when it comes to the strategic motivation, though, again, when one looks at the composition of the cabinet, I have the feeling, and that's just the feeling, I cannot back it up with hardcore data, it seems to be that Mr. Erdoğan is kind of determined to institutionalize, if you will, the system that he built. And 2 indications towards that direction is that one is what I mentioned earlier, sidelining his main contenders within the regime, because this cabinet is a completely inner circle cabinet. And the second is the attempts to bring the opposition into line, what Seren was talking about. And here, of course, one needs to take into account, I think opposition is also helping him to a certain extent. But in a way, kind of, I think the effort of the Erdoğan regime since 2017-18, and you can see this if you kind of have a systematic survey of, for instance, the pro-government newspapers, that the narrative about the need to establish, quote-unquote, a yerli ve milli, local and a national opposition, i.e. similar to systemic opposition in Russia, I think will now take place in a more aggressive way as the election is secured, and so on. So, and let's say that the system is consolidated. What does it mean? I think there will be 3 pillars of that system. One is the presidential system will be entrenched, so there will be no way back to parliament. It will be very difficult to go back to parliamentary system, maybe with some reforms here and there, but the presidential system is probably going to be staying with us. The second is we will see, I think, more of expansion of religion into the public sphere, which has been happening in the last 10 years, if not more. And again, the new members of Mr. Erdoğan's alliance, I think, also kind of gives clues about that. And last but not least, I think the nationalism, which Turkey has always been a nationalist country, but I think it has taken a different shape since 2014, 2015, mainly because of what's happening in Syria. That will continue, and that will continue on 2 levels. On one level, it will take this kind of discourse of the national grandeur, and that is basically in the context of the Turkey century. So Turkey is going to be Turkey is going to be able to play hardball with global players. And the second element of that nationalist discourse would be national rancor. That goes back to what I said earlier, that the crowds chanting for the death penalty, asking for death penalty for the imprisoned Kurdish politician Selahattin Demirtas. So all of that to say, I think one crucial question for the coming 5 years is that not whether Turkey will be a democracy or not. I think we've passed that stage, in my opinion. But the question will be whether Mr. Erdoğan will be able to stabilize the system that he created or not. And the answer to that, unfortunately, I don't have an answer, because if Turkey had natural resources, that would have been easy, but luckily it doesn't, so we'll see what happens.
Well, thank you. As the referee, I can say the first half of the game is finished, and I think we can now skip to the second session, dedicated to the foreign policy of Turkey, and I leave the floor to Kadri Taştan from the German Marshall Fund to chair this session. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Is it working? Yeah. Well, good afternoon. I think it was really insightful. Well, I have also one mic here. I took yours or not? That's great. We have another one. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think it was really insightful. The first session focused on the internal political situation and economy, and in this second part we will look at have a closer look on the Turkish foreign policy and external relations. My name is Kadri Taştan. I'm with the Carbon Free Europe and German Marshall Fund in Brussels, and it's really my great pleasure to moderate this discussion. I would like to also, on behalf of GMF, of course, thank to ISPI and IFRI for this cooperation, and personally to Valeria and Dorothy. Well, in recent years, of course, Turkey's foreign policy has been often characterized as assertive, but we have also seen certain pragmatism from time to time when it was needed. So we have seen reversal, for example, on certain issue or on relations with certain countries. Ankara, for example, has repaired its relations with some Gulf countries, is in the process of normalizing its relations with Egypt and Israel, and there are also attempts to have a new dialogue with Syria. However, relations with the West, unfortunately, have been complicated these last years, and there are many contentious issues that remain unresolved. And when it comes to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, so far, Turkey has been convergent with the Western allies in supporting Ukraine, but without becoming an anti-Russian. And so since President Erdoğan won his third term in the office on May 28 now, everyone is asking the same question. We have a bit, we focus a bit in the first session also on, with the EU ambassador in Turkey, but many people are expecting some changes, or maybe not at all in the when it comes to Turkish foreign policy. And there was also really interesting nomination from Turkey's former intelligence chief has been nominated as a foreign minister. I think he's now, if I didn't misunderstand, he's in Duomo participating to the ceremony for Mr. Berlusconi. He's not far from us. So there are also a lot of interest, I mean, how he will shape the foreign policy, or he will really have an autonomy to do this. So there are a lot of really interesting aspects to discuss, and we have a really great speakers with us. Let me to introduce them really quickly. We don't have a lot of time. I don't want to take much more time for introduction. On my right, we have Marina Vorotnyuk. Marina is Associate Fellow with RUSI. RUSI is Royal United Services Institute for Defense and Security Studies in London. It's a really long name, by the way. Thanks, Marina. And on my left, we have Valeria Talbot, Head of MENA at ISPI. And we have also two guests that are joining us virtually from Oxford and London. Galip Dalay. Galip is Associate Fellow at Chatham House. And from Ankara, Özgür Hisarcıklı, my colleague from GMF. Ankara Office Director of the GMF, so thank you very much. Actually, we will have two quick rounds with our speakers, but I promise you we will have also time for the Q&A. Please stay with us. I promise you we will have at least 15-20 minutes for Q&A. So Özgür, let's turn to you and to Ankara, and please let's start with, maybe you can give us a bit an overview of Turkish foreign policy prospect, and it would be also interesting to to have your take on the nomination of Hakan Fidan as a Turkish foreign minister. Over to you. Just let's keep it maybe 3 to 4 minutes, your first comments. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kadri. First of all, before talking about Hakan Fidan's appointment, and apologies for my voice, I have a severe flu, which is not COVID, but still it is difficult. Before talking about Hakan Fidan, first of all, Erdoğan is known for changing his foreign policy when the facts on the ground change, even during the same electoral period. So there does not need to be an election for President Erdoğan to make changes in his foreign policy. We have seen this happening numerous times. Second, an important development, of course, took place, which is that the elections in Turkey are finally over. So Turkey has been in an election campaign period since the local elections. That's a very long campaign period. And both in Turkey and outside of Turkey, Turkey was seen as a country that was in an election cycle. What did this mean for President Erdoğan? It meant that for him, the impact of domestic politics on foreign policy was greater than ever in the case of President Erdoğan. In the case of Turkey's allies, it appeared that as a result of the local elections, President Erdoğan might be on his way out. So, for example, when the Biden administration began in the United States, the presumption was not that Erdoğan would be replaced in 2023, but that he could be replaced. So as a result, actually, the relationships were largely on hold, and only the urgent day-to-day matters were concluded. Otherwise, the can was kicked down the road on many issues. Now that the election is over and President Erdoğan has retained his office, I believe that he will consider certain changes, and Turkey's allies will consider certain changes towards Turkey. Now, regarding Hakan Fidan, let's not forget that this is at the end of the day an Erdoğan government again. So the government is comprised of mainly very capable bureaucrats, but I don't call this a bureaucratic government. I rather call it a government of a cabinet of undersecretaries, because although their backgrounds are generally bureaucratic, all of the ministers are very senior and capable of managing their portfolio on a daily basis, on a day-to-day basis, without instructions from above. Having said this, they will conclude foreign policy based on the political directives from President Erdoğan. So the foreign policy that Hakan Fidan will implement will be based on political directives from President Erdoğan. Now, of course, the counter-argument could be now Hakan Fidan is in a better position to influence President Erdoğan's thinking, which is correct, but he was actually also in a position to influence President Erdoğan's thinking when he was head of intelligence, and I believe he did so. Now, one aspect of Hakan Fidan is that I'm told that he is respected, his credibility is high in Western capitals. So that could be a plus for President Erdoğan if he has the intention to normalize relations with the United States and Europe. And would he have that intention? I think it largely depends on how he intends to manage Turkey's economy. Right now, the number one priority of Turkish foreign policy is financing Turkey's current accounts deficit. But it was also so before the election. Before the election, Erdoğan's answer to financing Turkey's current accounts deficit was capital inflows from friendly countries, quote unquote, to the regime in Turkey, such as Russia, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. So this increasingly made Turkey dependent on those countries. I'm not in a position to judge whether this dependency impacted Turkey's foreign policy decision-making on any issue in a way that was contrary to Turkey's national interests. But of course, as dependency develops, this becomes a possibility. So I believe that Erdoğan's tendency in the upcoming period will be reducing his dependency on those countries and balancing them with capital inflows from the international markets. But of course, the requirements of ensuring capital inflows from Russia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia are very different from ensuring capital inflows from the international financial markets. He needs to at least project a semblance of rule of law in Turkey. I'm not suggesting that this will resolve Turkey's democratic deficit, but there needs to be a semblance of rule of law. There needs to be a normalization of ties with Turkey's allies. And by normalization, I by no means mean resolving all of the outstanding issues. What I mean is having a normal government-to-government relation with the United States, having normal government-to-government relationships with EU member states. And then there needs to be a resolution of the key outstanding issues that are, in a way, burning and radioactive, such as Sweden's accession to NATO. So this is not an issue that can be kicked down the road forever. And I think that Turkey will need to make a decision on this very soon. And that decision will...
Can you hear me?
I need to wrap up, right?
Yes, please. Sorry, because
okay,
I would like to come to
this is the point to stop.
Yeah.
Okay, Kadir,
the second round, apologies. We will come back. Okay, I will come back to you for maybe more specifically on US-Turkey relations and also Swedish accession, because there were, I have just read a few minutes ago that Erdoğan, when he was coming back from Azerbaijan in the plane, he said that at the Vilnius summit, I mean before the Vilnius summit, Swedish accession will not happen. This is the last minute news apparently on these issues. Thank you very much, Özgür. Well, let's continue on Russia-Turkey relations. I would go to the EU-Turkey relations, but I think we should maybe start with the US, absolutely, especially in Europe, there are a lot of curiosity about this. I mean, on this Russia, well, this Turkey's balancing act between Russia and the West, because there is a kind of balancing act between Russia and Ukraine as well, let's say, on the Turkish side. So please, over to you, Marina.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thanks to ISPI for having me here today. Well, Russia, Ukraine, Turkey triangle is very complicated to be wrapped up in 3-4 minutes, but I'll try to do my best to single out the complexities of this relationship for Turkey. Well, to start with, both Russia and Ukraine are Turkey's strategic partners. So Turkey balances, as you said, relationship with the both. And of course, Turkey is unhappy about what Russia is doing in the Black Sea, about what Russia is doing in Ukraine. But it's also understands that it's not in the position as any other actor actually to dissuade Russia from doing what it is doing in the region. So I think that Turkey's position at the moment is to adapt to the emerging realities in the best possible way and to promote support, to provide support to Ukraine at the extent that it deems necessary. So Turkey-Russia relations are quite compartmentalized and complicated ones. We talk about this relationship as cooperative rivalry or competitive cooperation because it has both elements. So these parties, they compete and they cooperate. So when we say that they converge on many issues, Turkey and Russia, we see many, noteworthy examples like Akkuyu nuclear station built by Rosatom. Then we know the problem of S-400s, Russian systems that created the rift in the relationship between Turkey and the West. Then there are very much shared interests in trade, tourism, energy, etc. So there is a plethora of issues where those parties converge, but they also diverge in many issues, and Ukraine is one of those issues. Syria, Libya, Nagorno-Karabakh. So there are issues where, where they openly compete, And probably to bring in, it's an interesting thing to be discussing about the elections and how Turkish elections were perceived in Russia, because I was following the Russian language sources, and I mean, we realized that Kremlin was very much hopeful that Erdogan is re-elected, despite some complications that he might have. I mean, traditionally we speak about personal affinity between two leaders, you know, this authoritarian trust, but still I don't think that there is a heartfelt warmth of friendship between the two. But still, President Putin very much put high stakes on Erdogan remaining in power because of the predictability that this lended to Russian-Turkish relationship. So he congratulated Erdogan, and it was very noteworthy what he said there, that he personally commends Erdogan for conducting independent foreign policy. And we know that Turkey didn't join sanctions, neither in 2014, neither in 2022. We've heard in the introductory remarks by the ambassador that it creates lots of concerns in Europe, that Turkey helps Russia evade sanctions, and that Turkey became a safe haven for Russian illicit finances. So there is a plethora of issues here to consider. But in Russia, yes, it was perceived very enthusiastically that Erdogan stayed in power. So Russian media featured headlines like, at Turkish elections, Russia has won. Erdogan's victory, success for Russia, defeat for the West. Very simplistic headlines, we understand, but still there was the fear in Russia among Russian experts, and I believe in Kremlin too, that if opposition comes to power, their proclaimed Western-leaning, repairing the ties with the West, would endanger the relationship. Couple of words in the remaining minute about Turkey-Ukraine relationship, just to add the complexity to this picture. Of course, what Turkey has been doing towards Ukraine and with Ukraine, cooperating with Ukraine, has been regarded by Kremlin as a dangerous brinkmanship, as a very unpleasant, uncomfortable brinkmanship. But Turkey had, you know, this independent position on that, it was not going to change. I mean, the most popular, I mean, everybody knows, and this has been everywhere, how Turkey was supplying Bayraktar drones to Ukraine long before the massive Western military assistance to Ukraine was actually the case. So Turkey was the front runner. Then Turkey closed the straits after February last year. This helped Ukraine to, you know, reinforce its position, to save Odessa, for instance, because Russia couldn't reinforce its navy from the Mediterranean. So, and one of the elements why Russia didn't manage to carry out the amphibious landing on the Ukrainian shore is due to this, the Turkey closing the straits for Russian military vessels. So here we see really, I mean, position that Turkey was trying to, to be pro-Ukrainian and to help here. But just the last thing is that I think we need to be aware how different threat perception is. It never escaped Kyiv's attention how Turkey completely differently views the war. What is happening in Ukraine. You know, for Ukraine and for its major allies, war has been an unprovoked act of aggression. Judging from what I hear from Turkish officials, they view it through different lenses. They don't think that it's not necessarily unprovoked act of aggression, but rather Russia's, natural reaction to what West was doing, encroaching on Russia's legitimate interest in its backyard. So here, Turkey and Kiev very much diverge. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you very much. I think it was. We will come back to the Turkish position on the war, and also maybe the role that Turkey wants to play as a mediator a bit later. It's true that, and then we will. It's a good transition to the EU-Turkey relations, maybe, because one of the reasons of this rapprochement, maybe between Russia and Turkey, is also the Turkey's frustration with the Western power. So let's move to. We heard a European diplomat, but I would like to also have your point of view on the EU-Turkey relations, particularly what do you expect, in the new terms? Thank you.
I have to be honest, Kadri. What do I? It's a good, very good question, and to start relating to what you said, frustration in Turkey about the EU. This frustration is not new. It has old origins, and it's the dissatisfaction about the negotiation process, critics. Vis-à-vis Europe for double standards in Turkey negotiation process. But we know that the negotiation process is frozen, and maybe it should be considered for the foreseeable future as is not an issue on the table. It's not an issue on the table of the EU. It's not an issue on the table of Turkey. So bilateral relations need to be redefined, and redefined on different bases. The EU ambassador in Turkey said step by step. Right, correct, but the EU and the European states have to think what step by step should mean, because of course negotiation process for the moment is over, and maybe they should also think of going beyond and actually say officially decide the fate of this process. But the EU, of course, is aware of the autonomy and that autonomy and diversification of partnership are two key drivers of Turkey's foreign policy. And these two drivers won't change. And Turkey has important consolidated relations with, although all difficulties and all problems with Russia and other international players, such as, for example, China. Turkey has important interest and in other parts, for example, Africa. And so EU has to deal with Turkey maybe focusing more on common interests rather than on common values. What I mean that they have to find a common ground for cooperation on things of common interest, starting from the common neighborhood, that is to say the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean, North Africa, for example, thinking of stabilizing together some crisis, and in this, not to be stuck on frictions, tensions. So go on, because we know that Europe as a whole is the largest trade partner of Turkey. European states, including UK, so I mean European, not EU, are the main investors in Turkey. So there are very important, sound relations between Europe and Turkey. So you can use maybe these economic levers, because it seems to me that today maybe Turkey has more leverage on Europe than the leverage of the EU on Turkey. So they have to adjust and to find a new, the EU has to find a new approach. Of course, divisions and different interests, different political agenda of EU member states are a weakness in the relations with Turkey, in my view, because one country focuses more on the migration issue, another one on On another topic, there is, Dorothée underlined the rivalry between France and Turkey in some regional areas, for example, in the Sahel, in Africa. So EU member states have to first put in order the house and then thinking of a new approach with
Thank
Turkey.
you.
Thank you.
It's interesting. Yes, you are right. I mean, Turkey, especially, we saw also in the section with the ambassador that we talked a lot about migration, and this obviously a leverage that Turkey has, and also in new geopolitical situation. Obviously, Turkey has also leverage, but the economic sense, I think that the European Union is probably one of the important leverage that the EU still has on Turkey, but we should find an effective way of using this leverage before deciding and seeing if the EU and Turkey can work in the different regions, especially in South. Maybe let's ask Galip his view on the Turkey MENA relations, because as in my introductory remark also I mentioned some normalization efforts, etc. But over to you, Galip, please tell us more.
Well, thank you very much. Normally it was the EU meant to have a transformative impact on Turkey's domestic and foreign policy. And that has not happened. And to the contrary, rather than EU shaping its neighborhood, the neighborhoods has shaped Europe. But one region particularly has a major impact, a major transformative impact on Turkey's both domestic politics and foreign policy as well. That is the Middle East. I mean, if you look at the impact of the Middle East on Turkey's domestic and foreign policy over the last decade, it is striking. It's very much shaped the Turkish domestic politics. I mean, everyone talks about the rise of nationalism in Turkey, but the current form of nationalism has been very much shaped by developments in the Middle East. The refugee issue is shaping the current form of the nationalism. The geopolitics very much informs the current shape of nationalism in the form of idea of grandeur in international affairs, different military operations. That is also very much Middle East driven. The new shape of the Kurdish politics is very much shaping the nature of the Turkish nationalism now. Again, it was also very much informed by the developments in the Middle East, most importantly in Syria. So therefore, the impact of the Middle Eastern developments on Turkish domestic politics has been significant over the last decade. But it also shaped Turkey's reading of international affairs. So in a sense, Middle East has come to serve as a microcosm of Turkey's reading of international affairs. The current shape of Turkish-Russian relationship, this relationship, the birthplace of the current shape of Turkish-Russian relationship is Syria. So this form of the relationship would not have existed if there was no Syrian crisis. I would also argue if there was no Syrian crisis, probably Turkey would not have bought the S-400 missile system from Russia as well. So Syria played a central role in shaping the Turkish-Russian relationship post-2016. But the same Syria also has generated one of most difficult crises in Turkish-US relationship. And also when Turkey look at the Syria and then broader Middle East, it showed two things. One of them, the Western countries, but most importantly, US has had less appetite for geopolitical activism, was in the process of downsizing its footprint in the region. On the other hand, it showed that Russia had more appetite for geopolitical activism and was enlarging its footprint in the regional security, be it in Syria, be it in Libya, be it in Eastern Mediterranean, engaging in very close cooperation with the Middle Eastern states when it comes to nuclear energy. Actually, the nuclear energy has become a very significant toolkit of the Russian foreign policy. So therefore, the Middle East has served a microcosm of Turkey's reading of the current international affairs, but also it has had a transformative impact on Turkish domestic politics and as well as its relation with major global powers. But now there is a change when it comes to Turkey's Middle Eastern politics. Over the last decade, again, politics, geopolitics, and security has become the overarching framework of Turkish foreign policy. We talk too much about politics, we talk too much about security, military operations, geopolitics, ideology, and less about the economy. Going forward, probably we will see an increase in the economic framework of Turkish foreign policy and a decrease in the security framework of Turkish foreign policy, and we will see also most clearly in the Middle East. Now it will be more economic engagement, particularly with the Gulf. As Özgür also mentioned, Turkey is experiencing a very deep crisis, and there is, several potential sources from which that it can try to find money. It can try to cultivate a closer relation with the West and try to find money in the West, but that will come with string attached. And relatively less strict attached money can be found in places like Gulf, China, and Russia, but most importantly in the Gulf. So the economy will very much drive the Turkey's approach to the Gulf, and it will also inform Turkey's approach to some of the crises in which both Turkey and the Gulf actors has involved. And if you look at recently, the places like Libya, where countries like Turkey, UAE were on the opposing sides, both countries very much refrain from taking steps that will cause escalation, and both countries very much try to find a way or a modus vivendi between themselves. So you don't hear that much a proxy war taking place between Turkey and UAE in Libya. I mean, just look at right now the current ongoing crisis in Sudan. You see actually the regional actors, including Turkey, has very less appetite to take sides, to get more actively involved. Rather, what you see actually, the Turkey basically cultivating or maintaining close relation with both sides of the conflict, and having a policy of not antagonizing any regional actors in this process as well. The third element is what everyone spoke about, is the element of normalization of the ties with the Middle Eastern countries. That is partially true, not completely true. Yes, we will see it will be an era of normalization between Turkey, Arab Gulf countries, including Israel. But when it comes to Turkey, Israel, there will always be the Palestinian issue will always factor in. So therefore, if tomorrow there is another intifada or another major crisis erupting in Palestine, obviously that will put its impact on Turkish-Israeli relationship. But nevertheless, in Turkey's relation with the Arab Middle East, we will see normalization or de-escalation be the order of the day. But this is not the picture in Turkey-Iran relationship. And on Turkey-Iran front, I see more friction more friction on the horizon, and actually enlarging geography of the competition and friction in Turkish-Iranian relationship. In a sense, the South Caucasus is being integrated to the Middle East. When it comes to the South Caucasus and Middle East will be an integrated spaces in Turkish-Iranian competition. So we will be competing over the Zangezur corridor, over the emerging regional status quo in South Caucasus, in Iraq, both at the nation level, at the overall in Baghdad, but also when it comes to Iraqi Kurdish politics, because Turkey and Iran are supporting different sides in Iraqi Kurdish politics. Turkey is closer to the KDP, the Barzani side. The Iraq is closer to the PUK, the Süleymaniye side. So the competition in Iraq will continue, and also in Syria will continue. So with Iran, more friction is on the horizon and more tension is on the horizon in Turkish-Iranian relationship. So we should not, the overall picture of Turkish-Middle Eastern relationship is not.
Okay. Could we keep maybe Syria for the second round quickly? because the time is flies, and I promise to have the Q&A session. Thank you very much, Galip, and thanks to not to limit your analysis only on Turkey, but taking a more broader analysis. So it was great. Thank you very much. Özgür, in this round, I would like you all to be brief. Then we can have a bit time for the Q&A. Over to you. Maybe in this section, in this round, you can focus more on the US-Turkey relations and the Swedish accession and NATO-Turkey in 2 minutes maximum. Thank you, Özgür. Go ahead.
Thank you, Kadri. I'll be real brief. First of all, let me start from where I left stabilization of US-Turkey relationship, but it will not be in resolving of all of the issues. The intergovernmental, interpresidential relationship will probably much closer than it was before the elections. From the perspective of the United States, Washington's main concern regarding Turkey during the last year has been not being perceived as taking part in domestic politics, favoring one side or over the other, either trying to undermine President Erdoğan or increase its chances of electability. So we saw a distanced United States. So this will change. The United States will engage Turkey more closely, both in positive and negative terms. On negative terms, we already see more pressure on Sweden's accession to NATO. For example, before the election, the United States was always saying that it's not an American problem, it's a NATO problem, and NATO should deal with this. But now Washington is giving clearer messages on Sweden's accession to NATO, and we will see increased pressure regarding the allegations that Turkey is facilitating Russia's circumvention of sanctions. But we can also see Washington engaging Turkey in positive ways as well, regarding, for example, the F-16 sale to Turkey, presidential contacts between Biden and Erdoğan, etc. So, as I said in the first round, there are actually also some radioactive issues between Turkey and the United States. One of these radioactive issues is Sweden's accession to NATO. As long as this issue remains unresolved, it will have negative consequences on the relationship. The S-400 crisis is also a radioactive issue. As long as this issue is not resolved, it will continue to intoxicate US-Turkey relations. Turkey also, let's say, cooperation between defense industries on a larger scale is also an important issue to be resolved. For example, Turkey is still not being able to receive the F-16s it wants from the United States. So I think that soon we can see steps taken towards resolving some of these issues, which would put the Turkey-US relationship in a more positive trajectory. But there are also structural factors, structural problems in the relationship that I do not see being resolved in the foreseeable future.
Thank you very much, Özgür. Marina, let's continue with you, and then in this section round, maybe you can focus more on this Turkey's role as a mediator, how it can evolve, especially the war is, we see the kind of, the war continuing and becoming a long war. Over to you.
Okay, thanks for the question. Well, Turkey's mediation clout has proved to be very significant. Mediation between Ukraine and Russia. So it has been instrumental as a mediator. This has been very much in line with Turkey's ambition to be seen and to act as this international, independent, important player whose strategic interests are being reckoned with, who has a global outreach. So its play is very much beneficial to Turkey. Just the most recent example to illustrate what Turkey does, so Turkey's role, and again, the complexity that it faces. After the explosion of the Nova Kakhovka Dam in Ukraine, the first calls that President Erdoğan made after being re-elected, was to President Putin and President Zelensky. So what he was doing, he was offering again the mediation services, saying that let's create the investigation committee with Ukrainian, Turkish, Russian and other international investigators to look into the causes of the incident. And then, just to illustrate how sometimes, again, not on the same page, Turkey is with both Russia and Ukraine, who are also, this interest diverge. In Kyiv's readout of the conversation with Erdogan, this offer is completely absent, and the language is very straightforward. This has been Russian act of aggression. Russia exploded the dam, so basically Kyiv really turned the blind ear, deaf ear to the proposal, saying that we don't need the investigation into that because everything is clear. Kremlin didn't react either. So this is just one of the examples that not all mediation efforts are successful. There are certainly limits to what Turkey can do because, again, as I said, because of this, of Ukraine and Russia's position. The most successful Turkish interventions have been about the exchange of prisoners. This is really well-deserved praise, and it's not only after 2022, but since 2014, Turkey has been vocal about the human rights violations in Crimea. It was vocal about, so it facilitated the release of the detained Crimean Tatar prisoners of conscience by Russia. So it did a lot. But the peak of this success, of course, is the well-known grain deal, or the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which Turkey, is being commended as an architect of this deal, very deservedly, I would say. What remains in the shadow and is much less known that the deal does not work properly. And here Turkey again cannot do a lot, unfortunately, because the vessels, the outbound, inbound vessels carrying the Ukrainian grain from Odessa and other ports, they got stuck next to Istanbul because of the intrusive Russian inspections there. So Turkey again doesn't have much leverage I don't know, how it could leverage really its influence against Russia in this case. So when Russia wants to show that it has some sort of benevolence or goodwill gestures, then Turkey's mediation is really successful. What concerns the peace talks, here I'm more pessimistic because I think that we've seen Turkey trying to mediate those early after the invasion last year. They failed, those talks. So I don't see Turkey in the foreseeable future helping to seal the peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, simply because until the costs for Russia become prohibitively high or Russia is defeated, its war will continue. So summing up, Turkey is an important mediator. Its role is, it's deservedly praised for trying to play this role, but there are serious limitations to what it can do.
Thank you very much. I know that I'm conscious that there are really difficult and topics that we need much more time to discuss, but because of the limited time, we have to be really quick. We are in Italy, so I think it would be important to speak about Turkey-Italian relations to Turkish-Italians, because it's quite unique, I have to say, to European level, even if there are many crises, bilateral or at the EU-Turkey level, but the Italian-Turkish relations are generally healthy. And even if you have a quite particular government now, by nature, so what do you expect to happen there?
Yeah, as you said, traditionally relations between Italy and Turkey have been good at the bilateral level and especially at the economic level. Italy is Turkey's fifth largest trade partner, is the second largest trade partner within the European Union after Germany. And Italy is an important investor, and not least Italy, there are around 1,500 Italian companies in Turkey. both big companies and small and medium enterprises. So there are very, very close and good economic relations that represent the core of I cannot say the partnership, but of the relationship. And it's interesting to see that in the past, level debate, the debate has moved. And today, when we look at Turkey from an Italian perspective, there's what I could define a sort of obsession about migration in Italy. And if you, for example, over the past year, there were several visits at the official level, high-level visit to Turkey, and twice two different interior ministers went to Turkey. The former minister under the Draghi's government, Lamorgese, went in Turkey more or less 1 year ago, and at the beginning of the year, the current interior minister went to Turkey to highlight the importance of the migration issue in the bilateral relations. There are, of course, and we have to mention also the importance of the stability of the Eastern Mediterranean, where Italy has crucial energy interests through Eni, the biggest Italian company that we all know, and there is an interest in cooperation counter-terrorism, and also Italy, I think, should, and I'm concluding, should cooperate more with Turkey in the stabilization of Libya.
Thank you very much.
I conclude here.
Okay, we will maybe come back during the Q&A if there is maybe a question about the Eastern Mediterranean. As you said, the Italy through the Eni play a huge role there. Galip, 2 minutes for you two, for maybe Turkey-Syria dialogue, and then I would like to take some question from audience in the room. Over to you.
I think very briefly Turkey-Syria dialogue, but also where Valeria left off. The Turkey-Syria dialogue will be a process. So this is not an event; it's a process that basically will reshape the new phase of Turkey-Syrian relationship. And there is three main files. One of them is obviously the Syrian refugees in Turkey. Secondly, the future of the opposition, but most importantly, the future of the PYD SDF-led Northeastern Syrian Autonomous Region. So there, I don't see an easy approach or an easy understanding between the sides. So therefore, this will be a process, and Russia has situated itself as the gatekeeper of this process. And finally, maybe on where Valeria left off, I think the future of Turkish-Western relationship will be also greatly defined by whether Turkey and then the Western actors will compete or cooperate in Turkey and Europe's shared neighborhood. And when I say shared neighborhood, I don't mean only Middle East, but because we see the integration of the Middle Eastern politics with that of Africa, so Middle East and Africa. And there I see a mixed picture, because on the one hand, I see a competitive dynamics between Turkey and France in North Africa and Sahel. But on the other hand, like for instance, right now on the Horn of Africa, it is Germany has the largest presence of any EU countries, largest diplomatic presence, and not necessarily the relationship will be as competitive. And Italy also has very significant presence in the Horn with Ethiopia, with Somalia, Somaliland. And in Libya also, I see more cooperation between Turkey, Italy, but unfortunately more competition between Turkey and France. So this, whether Turkey and EU, European actors, Western actors, will compete or cooperate in their shared neighborhood will very much define the future of their relationship.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to take some questions. Who would like to ask a question? You can also ask about the internal politics and economy, because we have our speakers still in the room, and I will give them the mic if it's needed. Please. Yes.
Thank you. Francesco Mazzuccotelli, University of Pavia. Thank you all for your presentations. Quick question, how do you see the evolution of the bilateral relations between Turkey and Saudi Arabia?
Thank you. Let's take another question, maybe. You? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for this fruitful debate. Erdogan's first visit after the election was in Azerbaijan. So what can this tell us about Turkish foreign policy in Caucasus, especially in light of growing tension between Iran and Azerbaijan? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question, please? Go on.
I have a question to Mrs. Sinem, actually. So I'm Turkish, I'm just interested in politics, that's why I'm here. I don't do really politics myself, I'm in marketing. My question is, how do you interpret people in Germany? Because you mentioned a lot about sociological things, about diaspora in Germany, who vote for AKP in Turkey. But at the same time in Germany there are pro-Green Party, which is very leftist, which is a lot about immigrant rights, obviously, but so the reason why they have this kind of choice is not maybe political, it's more of something else, or am I interpreting it incorrectly?
Thank you very much. Well, Galip, this question on Saudi Arabia is for you. Please go ahead.
I think, I mean, the relation obviously is getting closer. You can already see this. And I think this relation with Saudi Arabia also shows one of the qualitative change in Turkey's regional policy, because over the last decade, again, Turkey prioritized street over the elite. And now you see once again, Turkey sees Turkey will prioritize elites over the street. So, so when it comes to elites, I mean the ruling elite, so Erdogan and the new Turkish government will try to improve, will try to cultivate very close relations with Saudi Arabia. And I think the new prime minister there can play a key role, because he knows the whole elites of the Arab world quite well. So well connected, well experienced in these files. But still, the relation with Saudi Arabia hasn't traveled as much as Turkish Emirati relation has done. So yes, it will improve, and I think that Turkey will be always very mindful of the Saudi position on many fronts. But still, the full potential of this relationship has not been exploited, and still there seems to be, like, you know, some reservation on the Saudi side. But the economy and more engagement on some regional issues will be to fore. And on Yemen, Turkey will adopt a discourse that will be very much favorable to Saudi Arabia.
Thank you. I think, Marina, you would like to answer on this.
I can take the question about Turkey and Azerbaijan, because I'm working in South Caucasus as well, and what we are wondering now at the moment is with Russia being bogged down in Ukraine, you know, redeploying its forces from the occupied Georgian territories, from South Ossetia, Abkhazia. So its presence is shrinking, arguably. And Turkey, many would argue, is trying to fill in this void, you know, this niche, stepping up its presence here, stepping up its cooperation, I don't know, doing something that was, not so possible before, like trying to, you know, to go forward with the Armenian-Turkish normalization, or again relations with Azerbaijan. I think this has been very special for Turkey because of the kinship reasons and the historical reasons. Azerbaijan is a key country for Turkey in the South Caucasus, and I think when Azerbaijan won the war on Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020. So it was the first time when I think the world saw the efficiency of Turkish military technologies, because it was the Bayraktar which was, probed at the battlefield. So yes, the question is now, I think, is to see, and this is what I'm following personally, how Turkey will try again to balance, because it's what Turkey is doing, balancing its good relationship with Russia, not being too irritating in becoming this cementing force or irritant for Russia on the South Caucasus, respecting this, we call it often Russian-Turkish condominium, so basically shared sphere of responsibility in the South Caucasus and Black Sea. So how not to overstep? Will Turkey try to do that? I mean, many would say that yes, because Russia is declining and Turkey will use the chance. I myself not so sure about this, so this remains to be seen.
Thank you very much. Özgür and Valeria, please feel free to jump in. I mean, if
there was the question to
yes,
Sinem.
then I will go to Sinem.
I have nothing to
Okay.
add.
So, Özgür, do you want to? Go ahead, please.
Yes, I mean, on Azerbaijan, first of all, we should not read too much into the fact that Erdoğan made a visit to Azerbaijan, because it's in the tradition of Turkey that whenever a new government is formed, the head of the government makes his first trip abroad to the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus and the second to Azerbaijan. So Erdoğan was just following an old tradition. But apart from that, of course, it's no secret that the relationship between Turkey and Azerbaijan and between Erdoğan and Aliyev are very close and getting more closer. One factor to add to what Marina said is that the changing geopolitical equilibrium in the South Caucasus is actually, creating discontent, mainly not in Russia, but in Iran. Because with these developments, Azerbaijan's geopolitical position in the South Caucasus is increasing, and so is that of Turkey. And once there is a resolution, there is a peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia, I think Azerbaijan's position will further strengthen, and therefore the competition between Turkey and Iran that was already intensifying in Iraq and Syria will also intensify in the South Caucasus.
Thank you, Özgür. Sinem, over to you, please.
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very nice position to be in, to follow politics, because you are just interested in it. That's a side point. 2 points. One is that we actually do not know whether we are talking about the same group of people when we say Turkish diaspora living in Germany, they vote for Erdoğan, and then in German elections, they vote for SPD, although it also changed, by the way, recently. Now they are apparently voting for CDU, the Christian Democrats. But mainly because of the fact that people, Turkish diaspora living in Germany, only 300,000 people have dual citizenship. So when we talk about, when we compare their voting behavior in Turkish and German elections, there is no data that could tell us that we are talking about the same set of people. So that's one thing. So it's kind of statistically misleading to make the comparison. Possible, and I think that has to do with what I was referring to earlier, that the material reasons are definitely an important reason. People who vote for AKP and Mr. Erdoğan or who are sympathetic towards AKP and Mr. Erdoğan mainly do so because of three reasons. One is economic, and that's more prevalent among older generations. That mainly older generations spend a lot of time in Turkey. They are quite impressed by the economic growth of the 2000s, so the highways and the hospitals, etc., etc. And the equivalent of that within Germany is the services they get at the consulates, because the narrative is that the services, the provision of services in the consulates improved significantly under Erdoğan government. So that's kind of one narrative. The other narrative is more psychological / cultural, if you will, which is more prevalent among younger generations, who were either born in Germany or came to Germany at a very early age, and who do not necessarily feel that they completely belong, that they are not completely accepted by the mainstream society. So when a leader like Erdoğan, charismatic, strong, etc., with the narrative of strong Turkey comes into play, then I think it gives some sort of like a compensation feeling, in at least according to my interviews. And last but not least, there is also another reason that, especially back in 2017-18, which was prevalent among the pious sections of the diaspora, who do not necessarily like Erdoğan and AKP, who are kind of, for instance, supporters of the Saadet Party, Socialist Party, but especially after the incident in the Netherlands in 2017, when the Dutch government didn't let the Turkish minister to campaign, that actually led a lot of them who were hesitant to vote vote yes in the constitution referendum and determined to say no. They kind of changed the decision and voted yes at the constitution referendum. And the argument there is that if Erdoğan goes, we will lose all the privileges that, or not them, but their relatives living in Turkey would lose the privileges that they gained under the Erdoğan government. So there are different reasons that are prevalent among different generations. So that's also a generational issue. There is no one single factor that plays into the kind of sympathy towards Mr. Erdoğan and AKP.
Thank you very much, Sinem. And with this, we have just come to the end of this conference. I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and I would like to thank to all the speakers, Dorothy, Professor Seren, Marina, Valeria, Özgür, and Galip, and also all our colleagues from ISPI who basically work hardly to prepare this conference. Thank you very much, and it was a really great pleasure to cooperate for this, of course, with ISPI and IFAI.
Thank you, Kadri, for moderating and chairing this session. Excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and see you soon again.
Thank you so much.